Welcome back to another episode of Called to Serve, where we profile the lives of people who have given their life in service to the church. Thank you for watching our previous episodes and continue to tune into these stories around vocations in our community. Today, we're very fortunate to welcome Father Pat Woods, who is joining us from Sault Ste. Marie. Father Pat, welcome to you.
Thanks, Father Daniele. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure that with technology that you can be in North Bay and I can be here and we can be able to have this conversation and share it with whoever's watching. Fantastic.
Exactly. Now, I've been wondering, you're a big sports fan, and with this pandemic that's happening, especially baseball this summer, nothing's happening. How are you coping without your baseball this summer?
Well, I have to say that I went through withdrawal when we first started. And I had the shakes for the first little while because I wasn't able to watch my sports. But, you know, like anything, you get used to it and you adjust. And so here we are.
Of course. Okay, so let's just take a little walk through your journey to be a priest, because you've been a priest almost 20 years in our Diocese of Sault Ste. Marie. You've been to almost every region in the diocese. You're a very familiar face, and you've had an impact on a lot of people's lives in our local church. So let's take a walk through the journey to how you got to understanding God's call for you. So I know that you grew up in North Bay, Ontario, and was faith something that was integrated a lot into your early life in your family?
Yeah, I was blessed. I was blessed to be raised in a Catholic family. My mother was very, very involved in the church. She worked for the church actually at Pro Cathedral in North Bay, Ontario. And so I was blessed to have a great influence with my mom. And, my mother's faith grew as she aged. And so I'm the youngest of 7. And so I was blessed to have my mother's faith at a mature level for her. And so she shared a lot of things with me. I was also blessed because of her working at the church that I was able to get to know the priests, not only from being at Mass, but seeing them behind the scenes, seeing them as part of our family. And so that certainly helped a lot. And so, yes, I was involved. I was blessed. I went to a Catholic high school. I went to Catholic elementary school. And so it was an interesting journey. I certainly had the influence of Catholicism and the reality of what my mom shared with me in particular. And as a result, was able to experience other things. I was blessed to be involved in charismatic renewal when I was a young teenager and did youth encounter. And so all of these things played a part in my spiritual journey as a young person. But also the reality is I found myself pulled from different places. The reality is I recognized the importance of faith. I recognized the importance of being involved in the church community. I knew who Jesus was, but the reality is as a teenager, it was easy to get pulled away from that. And so I found myself struggling on many occasions where I wanted to be the cool kid. I wanted to be the jock. I wanted to be the party animal. And so as a result, found myself pulled in those directions. And it wasn't until much later that I discovered the importance of being who I am. And I'm good enough. I don't need to be the class clown. I don't need to be the cool kid. I just need to be Pat. And so that's come with maturity. But in high school, it was not there. And so I was a bit wild, let's say.
It's no secret. Like when you share your vocation story with people, you really go into the really like ups and downs of your life, the struggles that you endured. And so there were some pretty tough moments in your life that you had to go through before you discovered your calling.
Yeah, absolutely. Life is what we make of it. And sometimes we make mistakes and we have to live by the consequences of those mistakes. And sometimes we find ourselves on the top of the hill, and other times we found ourselves on the bottom of the hill in the valley. There's times when we don't know which way to turn. And so that pull that I talked about earlier when I was a youngster, a teenager, the reality is that pull led me down some dark roads. And so unfortunately, I got involved in alcohol and drug abuse. And that was something that plagued me through my high school time and my early to mid-20s. I really struggled with the reality of finding out who I was. And because the world was about me trying to be something really that I wasn't, I got caught in things that were detrimental. But here's the reality. And my favorite saying is, the reality is, well, this is the reality. God was present in all of it. And, so I went through high school and struggled with alcohol and drug problems. I'd gone to an encounter for vocations because this call to priesthood started at 16. Started to hear the call. Didn't understand it, but started to feel the thoughts and the feelings. And I ended up talking to my parish priest, and I went to a come and see weekend that the diocese was sponsoring, and realized at that point it wasn't for me. I didn't think priesthood was for me, and so I pursued other avenues. And funnily enough, being a bit of a wild person, what did I end up choosing to pursue was law enforcement. So I ended up with a diploma in law enforcement from Seneca College, graduated from there, started to pursue law enforcement as a career, and then realized this was not the direction I was supposed to be going in. I was living in Toronto, thinking of policing in Toronto, realized it wasn't for me, and returned to North Bay, and worked for the city of North Bay for a while, and also in the bar scene. Again, that pull, eh? And it was in that time, my brother had ended up with some problems with the law, and that scared me. And so I started to look at, okay, there's got to be more to life than this. And funnily enough, you're a vocation director. Funnily enough, the vocation director for the diocese started coming into the bar that I was working, and it was funny. I didn't know that he was even the vocation director. I'd never seen this guy in my life, who the vocation director was. And so this guy used to come in and he'd have a beer with me. And of course, he'd talk to me about sports, and he'd talk to me about, it was hockey at that time. So I'm a kind of Habs fan. The Habs were doing well that year. He would talk to me about sports and life. And I thought, well, pretty cool guy, right? And then all of a sudden one day, he introduced himself as the vocation director for the Diocese of Sault Ste. Marie. I almost fell off the bar stool. The reality from that was I was blessed to be able to go and spend a year with the Flying Fathers, which was a charity hockey team that raised money for charity. And I got to see the priests there from a different perspective. I saw them as human beings. And so that intrigued me, and also gave me a bit of hope that maybe this is for me. And so I ended up at Resurrection College Seminary, Philosophy Seminary in Waterloo. I spent 2 years there. Hated every minute of it, to be honest. Hated every minute, Father. Couldn't wait. I lasted 2 years, and I said, this is not for me. Hindsight being what it is, I wasn't mature enough to handle that. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was being called to. I didn't know how to interact with people. That would be something that was positive. It was very much a bully, and we use my size and my bravado and my background to rattle people's cage and keep them at arm's distance. And so I left there and ended up moving to back to North Bay. I was in Kitchener-Waterloo, back to North Bay. My poor old mother, God bless her, she would always let me home, which was wonderful. And I decided, okay, I got to do something with my life. I thought about teaching. And so living in North Bay, Ontario, Nipissing University is well known for the teaching program. I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to finish my degree and teach. Of course, we talked about the poll. I had two brothers in Ottawa that working in a bar in Ottawa, and I got a phone call. I'd only been in university. This was the beginning of October, so I'd been there a month. And I got a phone call from my brothers in Ottawa saying, we got an opportunity to buy a bar, but we need a third partner. Would you be interested? Hooray! 24 hours later, I was signing papers in Ottawa for this bar. I'd withdrawn from university, and I thought I had the world by the tail. And so off I went. And, in each of those pulls was me distancing myself from God. I knew God. I knew the importance of my relationship with God, but I didn't trust God. I didn't trust myself. And so I kept drifting away. And so here I am in Ottawa. I've got this bar, and I'll be honest with you, it was a wild spot, live rock and roll every night down in the market in Ottawa. If you're familiar with Ottawa, Ontario, the Byward Market is a huge, huge party area at night. So we were in that environment, and it was just thought I had the world by the tail. This is going to be my future. Well, through mismanagement, through partying, through drinking, through drugs, through all of that, lost. We lost it. We were there 18 months. We lost it, and found myself couch surfing in Ottawa. I'd been evicted in 1 week. Had evicted from my apartment. Lost the business. Turned my vehicle in. My girlfriend left. It was a dismal time. And I found myself couch surfing in Ottawa, trying to find a place to live, and managed to get a little apartment and hit the doldrums. You know, you cross the equator when you're sailing, you hit the doldrums, there's no wind. You're dead in the water. Hit the doldrums. And it was in hitting the doldrums that depression set in. I was at odds with my family. I was at odds with my brothers. The rest of my siblings I was at odds with. I had lost any friendship or relationships that I had set up or developed in Ottawa when I had the bar, because I became so selfish and self-oriented that people didn't want to be around that scene. And so I became suicidal and I thought about killing myself. And I can remember it was New Year's Eve, and I had the television on. And if you think about New Year's Eve, there's that big ball in Times Square that drops when they do the countdown. And I decided I was going to end my life when that ball hit the bottom. I had a handful of drugs, a bottle of vodka, and I thought, I'm not starting another year like this. And it was on my bed, sitting on the end of my bed. And I thought, okay, here it goes. And the ball started to drop. And all of a sudden, I heard a voice. And the voice said, hang on, you've got more to offer the world than this. That voice, Jesus, was Christ. And something grabbed me. I'm telling you, the Holy Spirit's unbelievable. He grabbed me, and somebody shook me. It was like they were shaking reality, and like, wake up and smell the coffee, you fool. You know, life got more to offer. And I remember falling off the end of the bed, and I started sobbing, and I fell asleep. And I woke up, and the drugs were all over the floor, and the booze was all over the floor, and my phone was ringing. And it was my mother. God bless her. So I picked up the phone, and she had got home on New Year's Eve, and it's now New Year's Day, and she's phoning Wee Pat. That's what she always called me, Wee Pat, the baby of the family. Wee Pat, 300-pound father. Anyway, I picked up the phone, and my mother's on the other end of the phone, and I sobbed to my mother. And it was at that moment, because I didn't realize when I heard the voice, and I didn't realize when I fell off the bed, but I began to realize after that conversation how much God loved me. That if he could love me in that situation, he could love me in any situation. And so I started to wean myself off the drugs and wean myself off the booze, and established the relationships again with my brothers that were in Ottawa that ran the bar with me, and reached out to my other family members and started to work on those relationships. And then, funny, eh? The pull. All of a sudden, me and my brothers, we always were adventurers, eh? Always wanted to live on the edge. Tell your priesthood is the awesomeness of edge, because the reality is the support is phenomenal. But I didn't realize at that point that. And I remember we had this bright idea, me and my two brothers, that we were going to cycle across Canada on a mountain bike. And we started out on that trip. We were 17 days on the road. And it was 17 days of the wind in our face, and 17 days of 6 or 7 hours alone on a bicycle. You got a lot of time to think. And God's got a lot of time to work. And God often reveals himself in our thoughts of our heart and the thoughts of our mind. And he was certainly revealing himself to me. And interestingly enough, it all came to a crash because as a result of what we had done with the bar, we had defrauded the government. So the government eventually shut us down and stopped it and froze our bank accounts. So now we found ourselves in Tobermory with no money, Tobermory, Ontario. And so my brother, who's a talker more than I am, I can talk a blue streak, but he can talk a greater blue streak. His is navy blue, mine's powder blue. The reality is, he managed to talk couple of his former girlfriends into helping us out financially. We managed to get back to wherever we ended up going. So I ended up in North Bay with my mother, and they ended up in Ottawa. And then I ended up working for another brother in Burlington, living in his basement and working for him everyday landscaping. And I remember he said to me, I don't care what you do, as long as you show up for work. And it was in that basement that I realized you can't run from your problems. You can't run from yourself. You need to look at things and evaluate things and reflect on things. And it's interesting, by this time, the other two brothers that had been on the bicycle trip, one was living in Oshawa, one was living in Toronto. I was in Burlington, Ontario. And August 23rd, in the evening of August 23rd, we all had, the three of us, major conversion experiences on the same night, all living in different areas of Southern Ontario, not been talking to each other. I mean, this is God working. And it was at that point that I realized I have to pursue priesthood. I have to pursue the call.
Yeah, like your story is so raw, like so real, and so like thanks for being honest with us and sharing that story. But I think like looking back at your story and like knowing you and knowing what you've accomplished in your priesthood, that's kind of why you are such a blessing to so many people, because of your experience yourself. Like you've lived this real life where you've had to uh, go through all these ups and downs of your life, and you know what it's like to be in those moments. So you are able to help people through those moments, to help people discover that God loves them even in the darkest moments of their life. So like your experience itself has helped you in your ministry greatly.
Absolutely. And Father, looking back on it, of course, hindsight's 2020. And I've been blessed to be able to share that story in so many venues, really across the country, so that people can realize that all of us are worthy of God's love. All of us are worthy to respond to that call. He calls us to different things, whether it be priesthood and religious life or single life or married life, whatever it is God calls us. The greatest thing that I realized, and I continue to realize it, is all of those experiences that we could certainly look and be ashamed of without God. All of those experiences I've used them in my 18 years of priesthood to be able to relate to people from all walks of life. That's the blessing of it, right? That I think to myself, when I went into Resurrection College in 1989, thinking about priesthood, I was 22. I would have been ordained, if the timeline would have worked out, I would have been ordained at 28. But I wouldn't have been the same priest, I don't think. Those years of the roller coaster ride, those years between that point in time and me going back to the seminary and entering St. Augustine Seminary in 1997, that 10-year period, or whatever it was, 8-year period, was a huge amount of growth. And all of those pulls, I look back at my life and I look at those situations, and because they're all there. I mean, it's all part of who I am. And I see God in the moments, but I never saw him there when I was in it. But I think to myself, as wild as I got, as much as I'd strayed or drifted, God never, ever, ever allowed me to get in a situation that I couldn't come back from. And I think that's something that's helped me in my ministry, particularly with people that are struggling in their own journey, their own life, their own understanding. And so I've been blessed. My story is a wild story, but it's no greater than any other vocation story, because a vocation story is a personal story of how God has called people. Mm-hmm. Mine's just the extreme version,
Yeah, and like you often say when you're preaching and all these different things that God meets us where we're at, and that's what He did with you, and that's been your sort of ministry and how you've helped people discover that as well, right? And that's where your
Absolutely.
gifts are so great because you've encountered God meet you where you're at and really make you who He had intended you to be.
Yeah. No, and there, it's how many times we hear God is good or our God is an awesome God. That's the reality, brother. He is an awesome God.
I was waiting for you to say it. I was waiting for you to say awesome. Okay, we're almost out of time, but I want you just on because like thanks for sharing that amazing life journey. I know it, and like you take like years of your life and try and turn it into a 20-minute interview. So thanks for doing that in the best way possible. But one of my favorite memories with you together is when we were at World Youth Days in 2005, and we we had just moved we had just moved from Germany to Italy at the end of our World Youth Days, and you had the awesome opportunity to celebrate Mass in the Vatican, but it didn't go as you had expected. And I was wondering if you
Oh,
could tell
it's a
that.
funny story. You know, World Youth Day is such an awesome experience, and we were blessed in 2005 to bring 48 people to World Youth Day from the diocese. And we had decided when we were setting up the trip that we would try and have some time at the end. So we spent 4 days in Rome, so the pilgrims could experience Rome and coming off of World Youth Day and that high. And so we had flew out first thing in the morning. It was like 5 o'clock in the morning from Munich to Rome. And we were landing into Rome, and we were going to be spending it. We were in a nice hotel. It was beautiful. And we were going to be exploring. And one of the realities of what we were doing is the group was going to be able to celebrate Mass in St. Peter's at St. Peter's tomb. And they'd lost our luggage. We had been divided and flew in 2 different flights, and so they lost our luggage. And so the bulk of everybody's luggage came the next day. It was there when we woke up the next morning, but mine ended up traveling around the world. And I actually didn't get it back till 2 weeks after I was back in Canada. And so I had traveled in what I was wearing was running shoes, shorts, and a polo shirt. And of course, in Rome, you can't go into any of the religious sites with shorts on. And it was hot. It was 46 degrees Celsius. And so I didn't smell the nicest. It was a little ripe. Anyways, we remember rushing because we're all excited. We're going, and Bishop Plouffe was with us. And he said, "Don't worry, Pat. Don't worry, Pat." He says, we'll talk you through all of the gates. Don't worry. But unfortunately, no one radio ahead. The guards like here would radio ahead in Canada and say, there's a bishop with one of his priests in church, let them through. No, we had to go through the same argument all the way through the checkpoints to get to the Vatican. And all of our pilgrims had gone down into the tomb, at the chapel in the tomb. And Bishop Plouffe and Bishop Harris and Monsignor Jolicoeur and myself ended up going to get vested. And because we were so late, we were the last. We used all of their vessels, all of their albs and vestments and everything we borrow from them. So we were the last to pick to get the stuff. And so, of course, the bishops and the Monsignor, they got first choice of what was left. And then I got the last piece. And I'm 6'1", and in those days I was probably 280 pounds. I'm a big guy. And I got this little alb that went to my knees and to my elbow. And this chasuble that basically fit over my shoulders. It was more like a shawl than it was a chasuble. You remember this because you're laughing right now. You were there.
I'm picturing it as you're saying it.
Yes. And then, of course, we had to walk from the sacristy, which is on the main level of St. Peter's. And then you go through St. Peter's to I'm sorry, I'm talking with my hands. Go through St. Peter's, and you take the spiral staircase down into the tombs, and then there's the chapel, right? So here's all the people that are in the Vatican. They're praying. There's Mass going on in different areas of St. Peter's, right? There's tourists there. And here's a bishop, and a monsignor going through, and they're led by their priest carrying the chalice and the paten that we were going to use. And my elbow only covers to my knees, and I got bare legs and running shoes. And so it was an interesting moment. It was a moment where you just have to say God's got a sense of humor.
Of course, it's like, something that some priests dream of, to celebrate Mass at the tomb of St. Peter's. And here you are in this album up to your waist.
Yeah, it's funny. That's one of those memories that'll never be forgotten.
It will always be funny,
Absolutely.
Father Pat, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Called to Serve. Like I said, you've been a real blessing to many people in your ministry as a priest, and that comes from the journey that you've had, but also throughout your entire journey. You've been open to where God was leading you in your life, and you've responded to him well, and you still do. You illuminate the path for so many that you're entrusted to their care right now, their spiritual care. You're the pastor of St. Jerome's in Sault Ste. Marie, and they're lucky and fortunate and blessed to have you. So keep doing what you're doing. God bless you in your ministry, and thanks for joining us on this episode.
Father, if I could add one more thing.
Sure.
Just to anybody that's watching this, to anybody that's beginning to hear God's call or in the middle of hearing God's call, don't be afraid. He's not going to let you down. He's not going to abandon you. And here's the greatest part of it. Discern the call, live a little bit of life, get some experience. Don't be afraid of that. You are worthy. And take the risk. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. Go and contact your vocation director wherever you're watching this from. Contact your parish priest. Contact someone and tell them what you're thinking and how you're feeling. And allow yourself to journey along. And if you end up in the seminary and you're in the seminary and you're discerning what to do and you discern priesthood, awesome. And if you don't discern priesthood, awesome. Because the reality is it's a win-win. And the blessing of going through the journey is the self-discovery in the relationship with God. It's awesome. And so I just wanted to share that because oftentimes we get gun shy when we start to think about, I'm getting called to the priesthood and how are people going to respond and what's my family going to think and what are my friends going to think and I can't get married and and there's all these different things that the world throws at us and we hesitate. And so don't. Allow yourself to journey. Allow yourself to experience it. I just wanted to add that.
For sure. And
talk being here today. Sorry?
Yeah. And it's important to talk about it with people because we can't hold that inside. When God is working in our lives, we have to, like the scriptures say, shout it from the rooftops.
Absolutely.
So God bless you in your ministry, and thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks, Father Daniele. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of Called to Serve. Thanks to Father Pat and his amazing vocation story. And like he said, that if you are feeling a call to the priesthood or religious life, to talk to someone about it, to call your vocation director, to call your pastor, or whoever might be in charge of that religious group. So we'll see you next time on another episode of Called to Serve.